Rabbinical greetings.
Rabbinical greetings, uncles, as before.
Yes, thank you, Elias. Yeah.
Anyways, shall we start?
Well, thank you for reminding me. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Shall we please start now?
Fortunately, my son asked us to start now, so obviously now we have an option.
Introductions first, and actually introductions first. Same thing as the time for starting now. The class.
Oh, very good. Very good. Okay, so we are in
I
chapter.
noticed that the parsha today,
Oh yeah, parsha questions.
similar to what we've been doing, only it's a much
That's not
smaller
my partial
space.
question.
The description of the Mishkan in the in the afternoon. I wait until 12:30 before I go on to the next parsha.
Yeah, because so that we were doing a mishpatim today, but then for mincha we started for truma.
Truma.
Very good. Okay. Okay, so we left off at the end of chapter 41 of Ezekiel, so we're doing 42 today. Hopefully we can get at least midway through chapter 43, because midway through chapter 43 discusses something very important in preparation for Mashiach. And chapter 42 is fairly short compared to some of the chapters we've covered. So there's a good chance we could get that done today. Okay, we'll need volunteer translators.
I can read it if you like, Rabbi.
That's Linda.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Very good.
The giggly one.
Thank you, Natanya.
Yes.
Okay.
She always makes Rabbi happy.
You all do. All right. So, okay, chapter 43. Now the art scroll in both English editions, in the Milstein edition that we normally use, and in the Tanakh series, in both editions, it gives a introduction to this chapter. Okay, but so because it's in English, I wanted to mention that it's quoting Rashi, but the Rashi on this chapter is probably not the Rashi you're familiar with. So that's the first thing I want to do. If I could help you understand your art scroll commentary better, it's already a plus. So, all right. So in the art scroll history book, the Rishonim tells you many interesting biographies of many Rishonim. So Rashi was one of the Rishonim, and several great Talmudic scholars are descended from him. So now his son-in-law, Rabbi Shmuel.
Did Rashi reward him so many descendants for being as righteous as Lubavitcher Rebbe?
Well, that's a little tangential, but Hashem knows his righteous ones.
He loves them like a father.
Yes. I'm glad you like tzaddikim. Okay. So that question, if you don't mind, let's push to the end of the class if necessary. Okay. So, but there
feel like it.
there are a few places where Rashi is not written by Rashi. So it's good to know the exceptions. There are 3 Gemaras where Rashi ends. He apparently he passed on before he was able to complete those commentaries. Usually, in every case, it's one of his students who completes his commentary for the publisher. Usually, it's either a son-in-law or a grandson. Rashi had only daughters, So his son-in-laws acted like his sons to continue his work.
Nonetheless, even though he had daughters, he had son-in-laws.
Right, but
in the next generation.
But if you have the Zechus the merit of being a descendant of Rashi,
and he also had grandsons too.
Right. So his grandsons exceeded his son-in-law. His son-in-law Rav Shmuel.
Did he ever have granddaughters too?
I'm sure, but let's stay focused. His son-in-law Rav Shmuel did one of his commentaries. I think it could be the same Rav Shmuel who did the it's either Rashbam or his son-in-law who did the last chapter of the Gemara Pesachim. It says explicitly that it was done by his student Rabbi Shmuel. It probably would have said his grandson if it was his grandson, but both of them were so humble that they may have just called themselves his student rather than mentioning their lineage. So either his son-in-law or his grandson Rashbam wrote the commentary to the 10th chapter of the Gemara Pesachim, which normally would be Rashi. So in the Gemaras, they use that commentary in place of Rashi. So if it's not Rashi, it's someone who's pretty close in scholarship level. However, there's nobody close in scholarship level. So here in Art Scroll, they're actually quoting from the pseudo Rashi in Ezekiel on this chapter. And then they're quoting Rashi saying he doesn't understand. So I wanted to clarify, it's demonstrated elsewhere that Rashi had basically Ruach HaKodesh. He could have a prophetic insight. And so therefore, if Rashi says he doesn't know, that's either a very perplexing problem, or maybe it wasn't Rashi. In this case, it's not Rashi. So I just wanted to defend Rashi's honor and explain when Article says Rashi is quoting, they didn't understand this. It's not Rashi. Okay, so let's see. So let me mention possible authors of this Rashi on this chapter. Okay, Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo, who was a contemporary. Rashbam, Rabbi Meir ben Shmuel. Let's see. Okay, Rabbi Meir ben Shmuel is the son-in-law who's the father of the three Gedolim, Rashbam, Rabbeinu Tam, and Rivam. So Rashbam, Rabbeinu Tam, and Rivam. So Rivam and Rabbeinu Tam became some of the Bali Tosfos. They helped write Tosfos. And Rashbam is simply he has his own commentary. Often it is printed separately as a separate commentary. Sometimes it is printed if there's no Rashi on a certain area. Okay, so these are generally the possible authors of this chapter's Rashi. So the quote here in Art Scroll is, "As for me, I had neither teacher nor helper for the understanding of this building, only what I was shown by heaven. This section must wait for elucidation by Elijah the prophet." Okay. So now, it is possible if it was written by Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo, Rashi was so humble, he would quote an entire paragraph of the other authors' essays. Okay, so now let's look in the Hebrew to understand the problem on this. Let's see. Okay, so if you look in the Hebrew, I'll use the Milstein edition. Full feature, it has Hebrew on the other side of the page. Okay. So if you look over here on this line here, and on the line underneath it, twice Shapirish Rashi, that explains Rashi, and the next line, Shapirash Rashi. So Rashi says that Rashi explained. Okay, now Rashi doesn't use a third person when referring to himself. So this is clearly a case of this Rashi not being written by Rashi. Except if it was instead of his son-in-law or his grandchildren, if it was his contemporary, who Rashi showed great respect for, Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo. he was also from France in the late 11th century. So Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo could have said this about Rashi, and Rashi could have just quoted the entire paragraph. You understand? So in this case, it's not clear for certain that this is a pseudo Rashi. However, in the Art Scroll Rishonim book, on the entry of Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo, who sometimes Rashi would quote, this is on page 127. Let me read you. Now, Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo was the teacher and uncle of Rabbi Yosef Kara. We've quoted the Rishon Rav Kara previously in class. So here in the entry for Rabbi Chelbo, it's Ben Chelbo, it says his nephew, most ardent disciple, Rabbi Yosef Kara, would often quote Rabbi Menachem's comments to Rashi, who received them warmly and incorporated several of them in his own commentary, especially on the Book of Ezekiel. Okay, so especially when in the Book of Ezekiel, you can find that Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo has been quoted. Again, this is page 127 of the Rishonim. Especially on the Book of Ezekiel. You can make that out. Okay. Fascinating. Okay, so this is just a side comment in a tangentially, generationally related commentary. But it could explain exactly why our commentary in the Hebrew is quoting Rashi's name twice. You know, now if Rashi had to refer to himself in the third person, I doubt someone of that level of humility would repeatedly call himself Rashi, Rashi, Rashi. You know, you see what I'm saying? He would. Therefore, this has to be at the very least, a citation from Rabbi Menachem ben Chelbo, if this is Rashi. If that's the case, so then it's inappropriate to say Rashi says, as Art Scroll is saying. You understand? I think this is a mistake in the Art Scroll commentary, in both Milstein and Tanakh series. In Milstein edition, this is page 353. In Tanakh series, this is page 654. In both cases, they're attributing this quote of Rashi not knowing to Rashi. Okay, but it cannot be Rashi, in other words. Rashi did not live in the 15th century. Rashi is also from... Okay, so this book is incredible, the Rishonim. I highly recommend
Yosef
it.
Caro did.
Yeah. So
You said he was the teacher of Yosef Caro.
Kara.
Oh,
Let's see.
not the Machaber.
Right. Not Yosef, Rav Yosef Kiro. So one of the cool features of this book, it shows the historical progression of the Rishonim. Yeah, here, chronological perspective. So it's pretty hard to make out in this context, but there's a chart of all the Rishonim. Let me just show the century. The 11th century had Rashi, and the 12th century had Rambam. So if you just want to look at those two. It's the 11th century with Rashi, and that's the 12th century with Rambam. These are contemporaries. And anecdotes about all of them in this book. Really cool. Art scroll, Rishonim. When I brought it home when it first came out, my father picked it up and he just couldn't put it down. He had been studying the Rishonim, inside for decades. And then suddenly he saw their biographies all in one book. So that was a cool moment. So okay, so this again, just it's a side point to this chapter, except that this is a pretty famous commentary by Art Scroll, since they've repeated it in multiple platforms. And I don't think it's referring to the actual Rashi. Okay, all right. Be that as it may, let's start the chapter. Let me just water down just a second. That's good. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, chapter 42. This begins on page 354. '54. ויוציאני אל החצר החיצונה, הדרך דרך הצפון, ויביאני אל הלשכה אשר נגד הגזרה, ואשר נגד הבניין אל הצפון. על פני אורך עמוס, המאה פסח הצפון ורוחב 50 עמוס, נגד 20 אשר לחצר הפנימי, ונגד רצפה אשר לחצר החיצונה, Atik el Panei Atik Bashalishim. Okay, please translate the first 3 verses, Linda.
Then he took me out to the outer courtyard in the direction going to the north, and he brought me to the chamber that was opposite the main temple building and the structure to the north, facing the 100-cubit length by the northern entrance, and the courtyard's width was 50 cubits. It was opposite the 20 cubits of the inner courtyard and opposite the balcony of the outer courtyard pillar, facing pillar in the 3-storied complex.
Continuing in Hebrew, verse 4, V'lifnei halashachos, Mahalach Eser Amos, Rochav El Hapanimis, Derech Hama Echas Ufischehem Latzafon, V'halashachos Elyonos, Ketsuros Ki Yochlu Atiki Mehena, Mehatachtonos, Mehatichonos Bidyan. Ki Meshulashos Hena Ve'en Lahem Amudim, Kamude Hachatzeros, Alkin Etzal Mehatachtonos, Mehatichonos Meharetz. Okay, please translate through verse 6. 4, 5, 6.
In front of the chambers was a passageway 10 cubits in width leading to the inner space through a 1-cubit path, and their entrances faced north. The upper chambers were narrowed because the pillars took up space from them, from the lower and middle ones of the structure. For they were 3-storied, so they did not have pillars like the pillars of the courtyards. Hence, the lower and middle chambers were deprived of floor space. You said 6, right?
Okay, so I'm going to show a couple illustrations. First, we're talking about this part of the temple. Remember, here's a sanctuary in the Holy of Holies. And we're talking about these sections in the corner.
Sounds like coils on an electrical component. The pillars, the way they're stationed.
Yeah, now the route to the northwest chamber from the inner courtyard.
Mhm.
Again, this is the Art Scroll map. I understood it a little bit different than this when I was reading it outside of Art Scroll. But, you know, Art Scroll put more time into it. For now, we could run with this, assuming Art Scroll is probably correct on this. But here is this figure here. So now it's an unusual shape, and it seems to lead to a section that suddenly ends. So we have to study it inside to understand what's going on here. Okay, now this other illustration here. So this is interesting. So this area that looks cut off here, over here, if they have a like a magnified area, and it seems to be a little path for somebody to, I guess, walk through. You know, not just squeeze through. It's probably at least 3 feet wide. Most of these areas were no less than 5 feet or 6 feet wide. So again, in the previous temples, the prayer area was like, but in a different area than it will be in the third temple. So to either side of the Holy of Holies, between the northwest and southwest chambers, you understand? In these areas here, these gaps, I'm not sure if there's going to be a regular people could go there. It may only be the priests, because it is right next to the wall that's next to the Holy of Holies. So, and you know, it's not
that might
clear.
be a place where they made the incense. That
I know.
chamber.
Right. Well, chambers, right? Chambers were for preparation, but I'm
have
talking
a
about.
question.
Okay, just a moment. I'm talking about the hallways between the chambers and the Holy of Holies and the sanctuary. So what these little hallways that you know, I mean, if you ever been to like a small basement synagogue, these hallways are huge. I mean, you could easily fit a synagogue in these hallways, but they're right next to the wall of the Holy of Holies. So, you know, it makes me think maybe it wouldn't be used for a regular synagogue. Just leaving empty space to just remind people to show extra reverence. You know what I'm saying? Okay, you had a question?
Yeah. So question on the floor here. This Torah question we discussed about yesterday last night before this class, which was Shabbos, Friday night.
What topic?
About this is a topic with a serious and hard question. which talks about a question that about Korach, which wasn't discussed.
Oh, correct.
When Korach fell into the pit, into Gehenna, did he live forever physically or spiritually? Because the Torah did not discuss that.
Right. Well, I would have to research more about that in the Midrashim. But it sounds like he entered Gehenna alive. You know, just like Elijah entered heaven alive. So
Elijah
Korach
and
entered,
both Pinchas,
right,
both Pinchas and Eliyahu.
Korach entered purgatory alive.
Yeah.
So in other words, it would be a different type of purgatory.
It is possible.
Now, purgatory not normally is a direct punishment for the way a person sinned. So if someone was arrogant, so they would keep suffering and being humbled, maybe in a humiliating way. But as far as someone who now with Korach, his sin was trying to interfere with Torah authority and say that the true authority was not a true authority. So I mean it's a complicated punishment, but be that as it may, when Beis Mikdash comes, there's a medrash that concludes that Korach will be forgiven eventually and restored to the Jewish people. So, so it's very interesting, because remember Korach did say he did try to advocate for the Jewish people at some level. You understand? At some level, he was trying to stand up for what he thought was best for the people. And so it's nice to know somebody who had good intentions at some level is not going to be utterly destroyed. He will be forgiven. You understand? But and again, when the Beis Hamikdash comes,
but he only became rebellious and evil because his wife was also to blame. She poisoned his heart.
Right.
With jealousy.
Right. His wife poisoned his heart, but imagine what his reward would be if he ignored his wife. You understand?
He would have been King Mashiach by then.
No, he's from the tribe of Levi and forefather of the great Shmuel Hanavi. But he would not have been Mashiach because Mashiach has to be from Judah. So, but again, when we're discussing the parameters of the temple, we're helping bring Mashiach sooner. So, Korach probably is more interested in us discussing the temple right now than he is us discussing him, because his suffering will end when the temple and Mashiach come. You understand?
Yeah, I mean, he is the main person who was the first Jew to be punished with Gehenna.
Well, I mean that is very complicated.
He's the first Jew to be punished with Gehenna, like
that is very complicated. That's a very complicated statement.
Yeah.
Because when did the time of the first Jews begin? And
that began after the forefathers were born.
And
after the 12 tribes.
If he had corporeal Gehenna, so he didn't have regular Gehenna.
Especially the foremothers.
Regular Gehenna would be a spiritual Gehenna of the soul, which would have greater suffering. A physical Gehenna of the body would have lesser suffering, which is important because this would not contradict the Medrash. It says Avram Avinu stands and prays for anybody who went through a circumcision to not have a long-lasting Gehenna. So it's easier to explain it if it's not the severe soul-based Gehenna. If it was he entered physically alive to Gehenna, so therefore there's a limit. He could still pass out from pain, so he does have that relief. If he didn't have his body, he wouldn't be able to pass out from pain. You understand? It would be without interruption, pain, until the Sabbath day. On Shabbos, God relents.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because for a second, I thought the moment you entered in a dimension alive, like Gehenna and the Himmel, you'd live forever.
Now, if you like,
physically and spiritually.
if you like this kind of discussion, the Gemara Chelek and in Sanhedrin, Perka Chelek, discusses those who enter heaven and those who are not destined to be resurrected, in the end of days. So the parameters are discussed. Who is definitely not a part of the world to come? Who is still going to be a part of the world to come, even though they did Averas in mentioned in Tanakh. So that's a whole discussion in the Gemara there in Sanhedrin. Okay, let's continue verse 7. Is any other questions that I may have skipped?
Or are we ready to go?
All right, so if anybody had a question, please unmute and let me know. Otherwise,
And
let's
please
continue.
let us know before we start. And forget to stop the train in case we forgot to pick up anyone.
Well, all aboard, because here we go. Okay, verse 7 in the Hebrew. Again, we're in chapter 42 of Ezekiel. V'gader asher lachutz la'umas l'shachos derech hachatzer hachitzona el penei ha'leshachos arko chamishim ama. Ki orech ha'leshachos asher lechatzer hachitzona chamishim ama. V'nei al penei ha'heichal mea ama. Umitachas ha'leshachos ha'ela hamevi mehakadim b'vo lahena mehachatzer hachitzona. V'rachav geder hachatzer derech hakadim al penei hagizra vel penei habinyan l'shachos. V'derech lifnehem kamar al shachos asher derech hatzafon ka'arkan ken rachvan v'chol motza'ehen v'chamish petehen v'chafischehen. Okay, please translate through verse 11, Linda. 7 through 11.
The wall that faced the outside, opposite the chambers toward the direction of the outer courtyard, in front of the chambers, its length was 50 cubits. For the length of the chambers, which were adjacent to the outer courtyard, was 50 cubits, and there before the temple building was 100 cubits long. Downhill from these chambers, as one comes from the east, coming toward them from the outer courtyard, along the width of the eastern wall of the inner courtyard, opposite the main temple building, and in the structure were chambers. There was a passage before them. Theirs was like the appearance of northern chambers, like their length, like their width, and like their exits, their measurements, and their entrances.
So in the illustration figure 28, page 359, that we were looking at, it mentions a description of the 100 width of the northern chamber. All 4 chambers were exactly the same dimensions. The chambers, again, in the corners of the temple. Continuing in verse 12. Asher derech hadarom pesach barosh derech bifnei hagederes hagina derech hakadim bavoan. V'yomer Eli lishchos hatzafon lishchos hadarom asher al penei hagizra hena lishchos hakodesh asher yochlu sham hakohanim asher karovim ladonai kadshei hakadashim sham yanichu kadshei hakadashim b'mincha v'achatas v'asham ki hamakam kadosh v'voam hakohanim v'lo yitz'u mehakodesh el chatzir hachitzona v'sham yanichu vigdehem asher yisharsu v'hem ki kodesh hena v'lovshu b'gadim achirim v'karvu el asher la'am. Okay, please translate through verse 14.
And like the entrances of the chambers that were to the south, there was an entrance at the main approach, an approach facing the platform of the singers, the easterly path that they entered as they entered. Then he said to me, the northern chambers and southern chambers that face the main temple building are the holy chambers where the Kohanim who approach Hashem may eat the most holy offerings. There they may put down the most holy of offerings, the meal offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the Kohanim arrive there, they shall not leave the holy place directly to the outer courtyard. Rather, they shall leave their garments in which they minister, for they are holy. They shall don other garments and then approach the domain of the people.
Okay, so let's look again at diagrams. Okay, so the Kohanim would enter the chamber there as a dining hall for the holy sacrifices that were only for Kohanim. Okay, but they were forbidden to leave the door and go in the outer courtyard where there would be the prayer services. They would have to go back to the holier areas, the inner courtyard, and change out of their bigdei kodesh, their holy garments. Their garments had to remain inside. It's like if you've ever been to a shopping market where they magnetized the shopping carts, so you can't take them to your car or something. So
Reminds you from stealing.
But judging favorably, of course, nobody would actually steal that. Okay, but
if they were stealing, punish them. I'd fine.
So with similarly, it was absolutely forbidden to take the holy garments out, because what would have to be assumed that they became unholy if they went to a place without the highest standards. Similar, it's kind of similar to like in a emergency room, there has to be a higher level of sterility from germs than in regular parts of the hospital. Similar with the spiritual and in the holy of holies. It's fascinating that this was a system already in place before the first modern emergency room was made. There was already a metaphor for what people should do, how to have a more effective hospital. Someone had a question?
I was just thinking that when they said they changed them, that meant they were not, you didn't eat in those holy garments. You changed into your regular clothes.
Well,
and that would make sense. No, that makes sense. You don't,
right.
In an operating room, you have special garments that you wear only there.
But the question is, if one who's eating or one who is just walking. For example, let's say Rabbi Mendel the Cohen had to share an important Devar Torah with Rabbi Yossi Cohen, so he wanted to go over and talk to him. So now the question is, does he have to change out of his clothes to enter the northeast chamber, or since it's only Kohanim there? There's no external lack of spirituality. He doesn't have to wait, and he could immediately share that Torah knowledge, even in his holy garments, because that room is designated only for the holy. You understand? So, and yes, changing to non prayer garments when to eat is always a good idea, especially if you like ketchup. That's.
Well, I'm just thinking that if he went to share something holy, the chance of those holy garments getting splattered by whatever was going on in the room was very high.
Well,
You know, it's like a surgical
maybe,
room. You only wear the
right. I
garments
mean,
in that
right,
room.
again, it may be as you say. I didn't, because it's third temple. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not an
don't,
expert
I
on
mean,
the
that,
halachas.
I'm just asking the
You're
question. I'm not making a,
You're not
Right.
a true rabbinic scientist.
No, well, it's not just a rabbinic scientist. For example, if you wanted to look at the Aruch HaShulchan, you could not look at the regular Aruch HaShulchan. You'd have to look at the volume called Aruch HaShulchan
Or ask the
HaAsid,
prophet if they're alive, Abba.
or Aruch HaShulchan HaAsid, which talks about the future. So there's a section of the Aruch HaShulchan commentary which also talks about these matters like the Rambam does. So again,
okay.
or you could go into Mishnah Torah and study this there. But often we find in Mishnah Torah it's an opinion. It's not necessarily the absolute law. We don't, that
Well,
will be
I'm probably overthinking,
determined.
so.
No, I am definitely underthinking, but I'm doing that on purpose. So because we have to maintain the big picture of Tanakh and not
Right,
get into the
right.
minutia of Gemara in the Tanakh class so much, at least. But I'm just saying theoretically, I can understand where. I mean, imagine being next to the Holy of Holies. Heavenly thoughts are inspiring Kohanim with brilliant Torah insights, and they just have to have the freedom to go speak to another Kohen about it and discuss the Torah. So that would be my argument why it makes sense, even if there's a risk of staining. Staining is something that can be washed, but impurity is a sin. You cannot make the pure impure on purpose, except under certain circumstances.
Thank you.
You see what I'm saying? So therefore,
Yes.
the fear of somebody going rogue on a bucket of fried chicken is not the main concern. Cookie Monster.
And
Yes.
someone's stealing my food. That makes me angry.
Although
I beat them up for that.
Although perhaps there will be a some sort of alert siren that will be sounded when you hear someone say cookie.
Yeah, there will be consequences.
Carney, please leave the room. Protect your garments. Please leave the room. Protect your holy garments.
Everyone, protect your stuff. We don't want aliens taking over the world. We don't want aliens eating our soul.
Oh, yeah, that would also be nice too. Okay.
That would be nice.
Okay.
Right. So, but again, so now if I missed a commentary and anybody here reads one of the commentaries that I missed,
then we would have to
that discusses this in detail. Please
we would have
bring
to
it to our
miss
attention.
right?
Well, that's the hope, right? So our goal is to find God's truth here, not to promote a particular preferred interpretation.
Right.
What's the God on his truth? So therefore, if for any reason I miss a commentary, feel free to mention it, and don't worry about making me look bad, quote unquote. It's not making me look bad. We're trying to find God's truth.
I didn't.
It occurred to me a question before, which I don't think we would be able to find an answer to in Yecheskel or even in the Mefarshim, because they're not current. Would there be electricity in the third temple that could be used? Obviously not on Shabbat and Yom Tov, but like what you said with the loudspeaker coming on, please watch out for your clothes. Please watch out for the holiness of your clothes, because Cookie Monster's coming in.
Yeah.
Or watch out for the Korban Pesach, because Cookie Monster's coming in with chametz.
Cookie Monster's coming in to get you.
Well, there are sources of light. There's the menorah, right? And back then,
Right, but there's
torches.
other things that use electricity.
Right. So I'm sure there is some sort of light thing. Now, the interesting thing about the Holy of Holies is flyovers are forbidden. So, for example, if they had some sort of a drone-based lighting or video cameras, to watch the daily sacrifices, which I think would be awesome. But but
Especially
if they
you
had
don't
that,
live in Yerushalayim.
right, because they cannot fly over though the Holy of Holies, so it would have to be doing like a letter U shape around the rest of the temple. So if in other words, so the cameraman would probably also have to be trusted, like Levites or something, not just anybody who wants. I gotta get the scoop, that's
Yeah,
that's not the that's not the
yeah.
main thing. It's to maintain the holiness.
But the Kadosh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies, is not a place of sacrifice, right?
Right, only on Yom Kippur service.
But is it a place where they actually perform sacrifice?
Oh no, not in the
I
Holy of
was
Holies.
under the
It
impression
was
that
just
the
a
Kohen Gadol
service.
was
Right.
like praying in there,
Yeah,
and
it's
with
just a
with a rope
service, not
around
like
his waist in case he died, so they could
Yeah.
pull him out.
Yeah, there was. All these factors are involved. It's the laws are beautiful, but each aspect of it is more complicated. So we couldn't cover a whole chapter in one night if we were discussing all the halachos. But it's really beautiful. I mean, remember, 1/6 of the Talmud in the Mishnah is only talking about the sacrifices and the temple service. So therefore, the Seder of Kudshim. Okay, so there's a lot to study. Thank God. And as we see the temple's about to be rebuilt, so people are going to automatically be involved in these kinds of classes. But right now we're going for big picture here, and let's continue. And I can't tell you how important tonight's reading is. You'll have to see for yourself once we complete what my goal for us tonight. Okay, so all right, so let's go in verse 12. לשחוס אשר דרך הדרום, פסח בראש דרך בפני הגדרס, הגינה דרך הקדים בבואן. ויאמר אלי לשחוס הצפון, לשחוס הדרום, אשר על פני הגזרה, הנה לשחוס הקודש, אשר יאכלו שם הכהנים אשר קרובים לאדוני קדשי הקדשים. שם יניחו קדשי הקדשים והמנחה והחטס, ושם כי המקום קדוש. בבואם הכהנים ולא יצאו מהקודש אל החצר החיצונה, ושם יניחו בגדיהם אשר ישרסו בהם כי קודש הינו, ולבשו בגדים אחרים וקרבו אל אשר להם. Where did you translate until?
12.
12? Okay, good. Now please translate through 14.
And like the entrance of the chambers that were to the south, there was an entrance at the main approach, an approach facing the platform of the singers, the easterly path as they entered. Then he said to me, the northern chambers and southern chambers that face the main temple building are the holy chambers where the Kohanim who approach Hashem may eat the most holy offerings. There they may put down the most holy offerings, the meal offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the Kohanim arrive there, they shall not leave the holy place directly in the outer courtyard. Rather, they shall leave their garments in which they minister, for they are holy. They shall don other garments and then approach the domain of the people.
Very good. Okay, so the introduction to chapters 15 through 20, to verses 15 through 20, page 363 in Milstein edition. Let me read from the commentary. For the moment, Ezekiel's guide has finished his description of the temple buildings. He'll resume it once more at chapter 46, verse 21. Now he returns to the point of departure from which he began his description at chapter 40, verse 5. The Chomas Har Habayis, wall of the Temple Mount. There he began his description by measuring the height and depth of this wall. Now he measures the length. Okay. Okay, so the Rashi commentary mentions again, this is not necessarily Rashi, just to show you how brilliant the Rishonim were. Even if you replaced Rashi with another Rishon, still you're going to get incredible commentary. So Rashi points out that this is an increase by a factor of 36 over the area of the temple complex in the second temple. So compared to the second temple, it's 36 times greater in size. I guess we're talking about the temple of Ezra in the calculation by this ratio, which with the size of 500 cubits, as mentioned in the second chapter of the Mishnah Midos, yielded an area of 250,000 square cubits. So that's 9 million divided by 250,000 equals 36. Incredible math. I mean, just to be able to follow the mathematics of that, you need a master's degree in mathematics but the Rishonim just, of course, it's just a mathematical equation. Just one more thing to clarify to a Rishon. It's amazing. Okay, let's do the closing paragraph of chapter 42, and then start the extremely important chapter 43 for our generation. We need chapter 43 to understand what is the next step in the process of the messianic movement progression in history. Messianic in the Jewish sense. Okay. All right, so verse 15 to the end of the chapter. Vichila esmidos habayis hapinimi tziani derech hashar asher panav derech hakadim umadado saviv saviv madad ruach hakadim biknei hamida chamesh meos kanim biknei hamida saviv madad ruach hatzafon chamesh meos kanim biknei hamida saviv is ruach hadarom madad chamesh meos kanim biknei hamida Savav El Ruach Hayam Madad Chamesh Meos Kanim Biknei Hamida Arba Ruchos Madado Choma Lo Saviv Orach Chamesh Meos Ruchav Chamesh Meos Lavdil Ben HaKodesh L'chol. Sounds like Havdalah, but it's fascinating after incidentally mentioning the phrase to separate between the holy and the common. We're actually going to have a different discussion here in Ezekiel. We're going from potentially allegorical to absolutely literal. In the next chapter is going to be absolutely literal. So therefore, it's extremely important to learn in reference to Mashiach times. So I want us to cover at least the half of the next chapter before we end tonight's class. Okay, so can we please get a translation, Linda? That's 15 through 20, chapter 40.
When he finished the measurements of the inner house, he took me out by way of the gate that faced eastward, and then measured it all around. He measured the eastern side with a measuring rod. It was 500 rods with the measuring rod all around. He measured the northern side as 500 rods with the measuring rod all around. He measured the southern side as 500 rods with the measuring rod. Circling around to the western side, he measured 500 rods with a measuring rod. On 4 sides, he measured it. It had a wall all around it, 500 rods in length, 500 in width, to separate between the holy and the common areas.
Okay, and so now, you see, we've started to have a precise calculation, and now we're going to go into precise descriptions. The first half talks about really the spiritual connection between Israel to the Temple Mount, and that's what I want to make sure we cover tonight. And then in the second half of chapter 43, we're going to go into exact measurements of the altar and etc. So whereas before, you know, you witness something, you make like a and you know, an estimation. Well, that's probably about, you know, this and this and this. But if God's messenger tells you it's precisely this, this, and this, then you know exactly what it is. And that's going to happen in the second half of chapter 43. But in the first half of chapter 43, we're going to be discussing God and Israel's connection to the Temple Mount. So this is something that's vital for us to cover. And it after you read this, you'll understand why it was impossible for Israel to give up Jerusalem even when they tried to, because it's guaranteed forever. Okay, so now we will need another translator unless Linda wants to continue. Anyone else interested in translating?
I would like to read, Rabbi, if it would be all right.
Was that Shirley?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right.
Hooray!
Okay, well. All right, so be sure to give your Amazon wish list to Aunt Shirley before the next birthday. Just that's between us, you know.
Before we lose it.
Okay, so chapter 43, pivotal. Okay, so chapter 43 explains why the entire messianic process has to be in the Holy Land, and why at the center of it has to be Jerusalem, and why at the center of it has to be Mount Moriah.
Mm.
So therefore, after reading this, you'll know that the only reason why people say, how could you build a temple nowadays? It's, you know, it's only from a perspective of not thinking about Israel's absolute rights from a religious perspective. But this chapter kind of like drives us all towards like we're in a stadium, you know, and we're all of our attention is being directed towards the playing field or the performance area, and that area is Mount Moriah. So that it's all written here, literally in prophecy, in chapter 43 in Ezekiel. And so you know, you don't even have to open one Gemara or one Mishnah. You already see that here, literally in the verses. So this is what we're going to cover. Okay, let me first do some Hebrew. It's in page 364 in the Milstein edition. Yolicheni el hashar shara sherpona derech hakadim v'nei chavod elhei Yisrael ba mi derech hakadim v'kolo kakol mayim rabim v'aretz heira mi kavodo umar'eh asher ra'isi kamar'eh asher ra'isi b'vo'i l'shaches es ha'ir umar'os kamar'eh asher ra'isi el nahar kavar v'apol el panai v'chavod elhei ba el habois derech sha'ar asher panav derech hakadim v'tiseni ruach v'tavi'eni el hechatzer hapanimi v'nei malei kavod Adonai habayis v'shma medaber elai mihabayis v'ish haya omed etzli. Okay, please translate the first 6 verses of chapter 43, Shirley.
Then he led me to the gate, a gate that faces east, and behold, the glory of God of Israel coming from the east. Its sound was like like the sound of a multitude of waters, and the earth shone with his glory. He was a vision like a vision, and I had seen before, like the vision that I had seen when I came to prophetically destroy the city, and visions like the vision that I had seen at the river Tibar. And I fell upon my face. The glory of Hashem then entered the temple by way of the gate that faced east. Then a wind lifted me up and brought me into the inner courtyard, and behold, the glory of Hashem filled the temple.
Okay, so now this is pivotal, verses 6 through 9. Okay, verses 6 through 9. Remember, this is in chapter 43 of Ezekiel, if anyone should ask you. Okay. Let's see. V'ashma midaber Eli me'abayis v'ishaya omeid atzli v'yomer Eli ben adam es makom kisi ves makom kapos raglai asher eshkan sham b'soch b'nei Israel l'olam v'lo yitamu od beis Israel shem kadshi himo malchehem bizinusam v'figure malchehem b'mosam v'sitam sipam scp muzuzasam etzel muzuzasi Vakir beniu veneham, betimu es shem kadshi betoav osam, asher asu vachal osam bapi, ata yirachaku es zunusam, ufigure malchehem mimeni v'shachanti v'socham laolam. Okay, please translate through verse 9.
I heard him addressing himself to me from the temple, and there was a man standing next to me, and he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of my footstool, where I will dwell amidst the children of Israel forever. The house of Israel will no longer defile my holy name. They and their kings with their promiscuous idolatry, and with the corpse of their kings, and with their high places, by their placing their threshold near my threshold, and their doorpost next to my doorpost, with but a wall between me and them, whereby they defile my holy name with the abominations they committed, so that I consume them in my anger. And now they will distance their promiscuous idolatry and the corpse of their kings from me, that I may dwell among them forever.
So twice God connects Temple Mount with him and Israel in an eternal bond, the eternal stage of the eternal bond between God and Israel. And it's mentioned twice already in this chapter. And the sign of when this prophecy begins is when the kings of Israel no longer promote idolatry. Okay, so remember, after Ezekiel was the Second Temple era. Okay, so the governors of Israel, they did not promote idolatry the first 80 years. After that, the Second Temple turned to non-service of God. It wasn't the human sacrifice idolatry of the yesteryears from Ezekiel's youth, but it was a form of idolatry nonetheless. And then eventually the Maccabees came, and only the first generation of Maccabees served God. The later generations rejected the kingship of David and claimed the throne to themselves. And until God unfortunately wiped out the family of the Maccabees because they were, standing between the future of guaranteed peace and their claim to power.
So they were corrupted.
Right. So that was later generations, not the first generation.
Later generations, they were corrupted.
So it didn't happen during the Second Temple period. It certainly didn't happen during the exile. Now that Israel's back in the land, why hasn't it happened yet in 70 years? Right, because has the Knesset been accepting God's kingship? Has any prime minister pleaded that God send Mashiach? And they can't wait to step aside and let Mashiach be the king. Have you heard any announcements like that out of the Knesset? And I remember there was one prime minister that Rav Aharon Soloveitchik said was a Yereh Shamayim, a God-fearing man. That was Menachem Begin. And even Menachem Begin gave up Mount Sinai, So there's just not been enough service of God through the leaders of Israel. So this is the sign, and this is the place. The leaders of Israel have to reject the equivalent of idolatry by putting the religious rights of Israel last. But it is the entire Jewish faith depends on Mount Moriah being available for the Jewish temple. And this was known from before the second temple was built. Over 2,400 years, this has been known. So it's revisionist historians, people uninterested in religiosity, and people who don't care about Israel's rights to their religious expression. So this has to change. This is the main thing. And here we have scriptural evidence. If anyone asks you, here is the source. Ezekiel Chapter 43. Israel has no choice but to have Mount Moriah. Just a question, can we get to this thing without a war? Is there a way around aggravating people unnecessarily? But it was known before Israel returned. It was known before even the Quran admitted that Israel would return. That Israel would return to Mount Moriah and build a temple there. It was known. Okay, it was known. So this has to be known. This is one of the most important things that we could help people to understand. Israel has to have the Temple Mount. The world peace depends on it. Otherwise, God is not with Israel. If God is not with Israel, there is no guarantee of world peace, no protection against cataclysm that is the temple. You understand? So, so now look in verse 7. The house of Israel will no longer defile my holy name, and they and their kings. They and their kings. So this fits in perfectly with the idea that right before Mashiach comes, there will be some sort of a democratic rule in the Holy Land that the people and their kings are choosing us. The people, the will of the people is first. So therefore, the will of the people was to support the decisions of their bad kings. You understand? It's all implied right here in the verse. It's incredible, and it fits in perfectly with history. Obviously, when if God's prophets know the future, certainly He does, right? It's an easy calculation right there. Okay. Now we absolutely have to cover a couple more verses before we can call it an evening. Then we can continue in more details, perhaps next week, the second half of this chapter, as far as more precise measurements of the altar, things like this. Okay, let's go to verse 10. And this, by the way, is the Haftarah for the Parshas Tetzaveh, coming up. And it's really interesting. So therefore, it's fascinating that this is something that is repeated in synagogues. But I had to point this out. The first verses before that, in 43, it's not repeated as a Haftarah, but it is foundational to help people understand why Israel has to be on the Temple Mount. It's God's choice. It's God's choice. There was no democratic choice about this. God demands it. See, Ezekiel says that he heard God Himself addressing him personally, right?
Yes.
So before he was just talking to an angel, but God himself interrupts this narrative to talk about his connection with Israel is dependent on no more idolatry on the Temple Mount. Amazing. So all the blessings the world could have of no more cataclysm is entirely dependent on this choice of the people and their kings. Again, alluding to a time of democracy. Okay, continuing in verse 10. Ata ben adam haged es beis Israel es habayis v'yikalmu me'avonosehem umaddu es tachnis v'im nichlemu mikol asher asu tzuras habayis u'suchunaso umotzaav umovaav v'chol tzurosav v'eis kol chukosav v'chol tzurosav v'chol torosav hodal sam sov le'nehem Vishmu es kol tsuraso, ves kol chukosav, asuosam. Zos Toras Abayis al Rosh Hahar, kol guvulo, saviv kodesh kodeshim, hine zos Toras Habayis. Okay, please translate through verse 12.
You, son of man, tell the house of Israel about the temple, and let them be ashamed of their iniquities. Calculate the temple's design. If they become ashamed of all that they have done, then make known to them the form of the temple and its design, its exits, its entrances, and all its buildings, forms, all of its laws, and all its design and all its teachings, and write all this down before their eyes so that they may safeguard its entry, form, and all of its rules and fulfill them. This is a teaching regarding the temple atop the mountain. Its entire boundary all around shall be most holy. Behold, this is the teaching regarding the temple.
Okay, and then we'll continue, God willing, next time with the precise measurements of the altar and other really interesting things. Okay, so any questions or comments, especially about chapter 43?
Yeah, the
So
very
amazing
last sentence, the land surrounding the temple is going to also be holy.
Right, not a staging ground for terrorists to stone people, right? That's just my interpretation. I know it's just my interpretation, okay, but you could call me.
Well, I'm just saying that if everyone will have to be very, very respectful of the entire area, not just the building, but the land.
Yeah.
Will
And-
the Kotel be part of the temple? Or will it be knocked down and built afresh?
Well, the temple is huge, so that's a question. If it could be incorporated. It's possible to incorporate certain things if people make it. It's also possible. Again, remember, there's an opinion held by the Chavetz Chaim even, and most recently by Rav Chaim Kanievsky, that the temple is physically built, but in the Garden of Eden dimension, and waiting to descend. So in that case, now if something is like, for example, materializing, into our dimension, so in theory, when it materializes, it could absorb whatever it materializes into or in place of.
Will the temple be larger than?
So the answer is maybe.
Plateau?
Yeah. Right, exactly. This will be larger than any temple before. As I said, the temple in the days of Ezra and Zerubbabel, it was just the temple and sanctuary building with a little section for the altar, the slaughtering, the Israelites to pray, and most of the prayer area was reserved actually for women in the second temple.
Okay.
The temple they describe in the Gemara.
Now,
I
but then
forget
Herod,
what Sechta it is.
but then Herod rebuilt it.
That
When
was Herod's temple.
Right. So when Herod rebuilt it, so that's the fancier temple you see in
The
the
one
model.
at the Holy Land Museum.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's
Only
Herod's
it's a
second
lot
temple.
smaller at the Holy Land Museum.
Right. So that is much bigger than the Ezra's second temple, and it is a little bit bigger than Solomon's temple, but it is smaller than Ezekiel's temple.
Okay.
You can't physically fit Ezekiel's temple on the crown of the Mount Moriah, unless, of course, you would have technology to resurface mountains, which, of course, they do nowadays.
Yeah. The question is how much of our current technology can be used in building the temple and in the actual avoda, the work in the temple. You know, like with the megaphone. Is that
Remember I mentioned one time I was in a synagogue with a domed area above where they read the Torah, and when you whisper there, you could hear it from the other side of the synagogue. So the acoustics could be affected just by the way you build something, and it could substitute for sound technology. I found that cooler than sound technology. That God placed in nature the ability to create a megaphone out of a building. You know what I'm saying?
the Flintstones?
Right. As a teenager, I just found that so amazing. I
experienced that whenever I visited the Capitol building in DC. Amazing.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
But if it is true that it comes down from above, everything will be perfect. We won't need to worry about anything.
Exactly. God does perfect. That's what he does.
I think Robbie has a question.
Okay. Question?
Yeah, you brought up this question when you said that the temple may come down at the time of, I think you meant Garden of Eden time in the New World, rather than coming down in this world.
Well, according to Rambam quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin that nothing is different between this world and the next world, Mashiach time, except for the Shibud Malchuyos, that Israel won't be subjugated to the nations of the world. So therefore, according to Rambam's theories, again, we discussed there's a difference of opinion, but according to Rambam's theories, it must be in this world. It cannot be in the next world. The temple must be physically built in this world. And according to Rambam's perspective, humans will build it.
But there is
Why
an
does
opinion.
he feel that way?
Oh, we can ask him, but we may have to wait for Tchias.
Maybe the first two were built because the first two were built that way.
Yeah, Rambam is very practical.
Fully,
But it all fits. I mean, the precedent is to do it physically, right? The Mishkan tabernacle was built by Moses, and the utensils were built by several people, and then the and then the temple
was also built like that.
right. Well, the mission.
So then does that mean we will be perfect in order to build it this time?
Oh, we don't have to be. God is perfect. We just listen to him, and it covers a lot of a lot of problems. Like
building it might get us ready for it.
Yeah, you put an all-star on a group of teenagers, and suddenly they could compete with a college team, right? So when you have God proactively involved with us because we're no longer ignoring him, he deserves better. And when we try to and succeed in giving him better, then he'll be with us and he'll do a lot of the work for us. And a lot of the work is just a progression of nature. If it's according to Rambam, natural building, so God already had the science, build up technology. We don't have to wait for a new discovery to start to build it. If it's supernatural, so then it's even more convenient, and then we don't even have to think about what about the previous temple wall, etc. But it just this is very important if you, especially in today's climate, if you're saying why didn't Israel just give up Jerusalem? It's because world peace depends on Israel having Jerusalem, But again, there were a couple prime ministers who were willing to give up Jerusalem, but they couldn't do it, and this is why. It's a guaranteed forever, literally mentioned by God in today's chapter.
We can.
Yeah.
Hey, Rabbi Friedlander, I've got a question. This is James.
Hi.
I've seen a lot of places in Tanakh where you have the wood choppers and the water carriers. Those are usually non-Jews. Like King Solomon made those guys and things like that, and they helped with building the temple. But I'm kind of the opinion that it's only non-Jews who are building the temple. What part are non-Jews in production of the temple? Are there going to be Jews involved? Or are they just going to be designing it? What can you tell us about the physical implementation of the temple, how it relates to non-Jews and Jews interacting?
Well, I think we're in a different time in history where there's so many people who would pay money to be a builder of the temple. Let me carry sticks just one time, right?
They have a
Please, I'm begging you.
what is that thing called where you donate money and you the project? I forget what it's called.
Yeah, and when I was teaching the book of Joshua, so I gave a interpretation according to this, that Joshua came up with a way to punish the Gibeonites for their deception of Israel that was not completely a punishment. Right? He made them the woodcutters, right? So again, in the later generation, people would beg for that job. But what Joshua saw was, even though they deceived and pretended to not be one of the Canaanites, they were joining Israel and rejecting idolatry. So therefore, to calm the people, he had to punish them. Right.
Kickstarter, that's what I'm thinking of. You should start a Kickstarter.
Yeah, crowdfunding, right? That would be
They
a
were
lucrative
like
one.
former day Noahide.
Yeah.
The-
Right. Yeah, well, the Gibeonites, yeah, right. So, but
That's what I meant.
the point is, they were an entire nation of Canaan who abandoned idolatry. The only one of the 31 kingdoms. 2 kingdoms fled from Israel, and 29 had to be
Pushed out.
well, 28 had to were destroyed.
Yeah.
Only the Gibeonites remained and prospered in the land because they gave up idolatry. But all the other nations of Canaan did not. So that's
Well,
profound.
that was the deal. Give up idolatry, you can stay. Don't give up idolatry, you can go.
Yeah, but somebody actually took up the offer. I mean, how many times in history have people chosen bad over and over and over? In every case,
it was good.
Not one lemming not learning from the next.
Rabbi, isn't there a teaching on if a person is just reading and studying the dimensions of the third temple, it is as they are
equal to building it?
Yes, we discussed that a couple of weeks ago, and so we're participants in building the temple, and so now, so this is really interesting, because now that we're upping the ante, we're going from a estimated measurement to a precise measurement in middle of chapter 43 onward. Yeah. So that's very, very fascinating.
This could be the way that we physically build the temple down here. It's just by reading and studying it.
Yeah, and again, the Mishnah Talmudic tractate of Midos is the one to cover, if maybe those who wanted to pick up the Art Scroll Mishnah book or something. that's something you could do, and it's really cool.
Okay,
But-
when
Wondering.
Yeah.
Would they be allowed to use power tools, or do they have to stick with the the worms?
Well, only the hewn stone temple cannot be of hewn stone. It has to be, sorry, the altar. The altar cannot be hewn. It has to be wormed,
Wormed.
shamered. But the other parts of the temple don't have that restriction.
okay,
So
when
could
you
they
said-
use power tools?
Theoretically, but
Yes.
again, the laws of Tumantara of purity will be involved. So the bigger question is, first we need the red heifer.
Can we get a red cow?
Well, yeah, we can, but once we do that, so then people have to be pure if they're using the tools. If someone's impure, they can no longer do. It's fascinating. They can no longer do menial labor if they're not pure, because it's not menial labor. It's work for the holy temple.
Kodesh.
But that just it's
Wow.
astounding. Just because we're not used to that.
I was wondering whether they could, use a saw blade that's, that you can't make it out of iron, but could they make it out of plastic, for example?
Yeah, anything's possible, but a lot of things can makabel tuba can accept impurity, so it has to be done in the right way.
Yeah.
And then
Is
so
plastic
that is
makabel
complicated.
tuma?
And what?
Is plastic makabel tuma?
Yeah, it could.
Because they didn't really have plastic back in the time of the temple, so.
Right.
No.
Well, you could learn from the laws of kosher, the kashrus, that
Mhm.
it is similar to glass, because if you heat metal becomes purified. If you heat wood, it becomes ashes. It's not usable at all. But you could melt glass and reuse the what's melted in a new glass. And similar with plastic, it could be melted and then reformed.
So when you melt it and reform it, does that make it tahor, pure?
Yeah, it should.
Okay.
Depends how it's done.
I'm thinking about the story I heard about. I don't remember what people it was, but they would take all their kalim, all their vessels every year, and they would break them and reform the clay and make Pesach dishes out of them. Every year before Pesach, they would redo their whole. They didn't have to have a separate set of Pesach stuff.
Right, China, which comes from clay, is similar to glass and plastic.
Yeah,
Can be reformed. Exactly.
They did the
So you just quoted a source before I did. That's pretty good.
I don't remember where it's from. Don't remember which
it's a
people
precedent.
it is.
Very good. Very good.
Intuition.
I'm never very good at finding remembering the protagonists. I just remember the stories.
Very good. Okay. Any other questions before we call it the evening?
No.
Okay.
Evening.
Thanks,
The
everyone.
dimension-
Thanks again to the
Thank you,
to
Rabbi.
the Kirks. All right.
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Wait just a second.
Thank God.
The
Wonderful
dimensions,
stuff.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great week, everyone. Bye. Be well.
Uncles and aunts.
Bye. Be well.